Oh no, Tim, the puzzler's loose again.
Great Scott. We'll have to be on the lookout for puzzle-related crimes, Paul, old chum.
Holy modus operandi, Tim, you're right. But then there might also be crimes related to aeronautics.
Yes, but possibly also Shakespeare. Just what is Puzzler's main theme?
Yeah, that's the real puzzler. To the bat poles!
Welcome to the Bat Poles, millions and millions served. Makes absolutely no sense. This is Tim in Tokyo with my brother Paul in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Billions and billions of years ago. Carl Sagan, of course.
So we started up with a Batman theme played on the ukulele from Al Wood's YouTube channel, published December 1st, 2012. I actually have 3 ukulele covers of the Batman theme, and they all sound pretty much the same. So I just chose one.
It's hard to be stylistically unique with a ukulele. It just is.
Yeah.
Kind of like with a banjo, although I know that I would be, people will throw rocks and garbage at me for saying that.
All right, so back in episode 147, we talked about letters that writer Stanford Sherman wrote to his girlfriend Carol Dwyer, which we are still greatly indebted to Mitch Kaba for sharing with us.
Yes, indeed.
I wanted to quote the relevant passage from Sherman's letter of September 10th, 1966, where he talks about visiting the set during shootings of Hizzoner the Penguin. The next paragraph reads, "Nice postscript to the episode was they're giving me a script to rewrite. Couple of guys did a script for Zsa Zsa Gabor, which they decided to do because of the Gabor exploitability, lots of coverage in the press, etc. The script is terrible, and my job is to bring it up to snuff, which means completely rewriting the fool thing, but for a nice fat fee. So his assessment was basically ours, right? Yeah. Got to completely redo it. Start over.
Right. Although, walk away with a few choice premises, such as what wound up being the Cupid darts, which will, make Batman at least nearly fall in love with Marsha. That survived. But that's about it.
Yeah, there are a few little similarities, but...
And, of course, he got, Sherman got sole writing credit as well, so he, got a little more fluff out of the deal than even he alludes to in his letter.
Yeah, it wasn't even billed as a rewrite, even though it was, sort of. Or at least that's what it started out as, put it that way. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a script which I believe Oscar Lilly, our former proxy researcher, had already scanned and passed on to me for free when I was at the American Heritage Center in 2017. Curiously, it's not on the American Heritage Center site. It's not listed in their Dozier archives.
That's strange.
The Cannan and Cash version is, but there's no mention of any version by Sherman of Marsha, Queen of Diamonds. Must be something that somebody forgot to put in the database, or I don't know. Not really a database; it's just a hard-coded page. But
we should contact, your present contact at Laramie and let her know that this is not in the database.
Well, I could, but then we'd have to know which box it's in. So let's go through all the boxes of the Dozier collection.
Sure. Yes, and while Oscar had a definite, personal reason, personal love of the show that meant that he probably knew those boxes intimately, that may not be the case for our new contact, who's not that new anymore. What is her name?
Barbara.
Barbara, yes.
Barbara Bogart.
Yes, a librarian named Barbara. Who'da thunk?
So, of course, I'll put the PDF in the show notes. It's dated September 23rd, 1966. It has Howie Horowitz's initials on the cover, but there are no comments at all written inside.
Mm-hmm.
And we did ask the all-seeing, all-knowing 66 message board for comments on the script, and the only one to respond was High C. And he commented, first of all, the main improvement of this one over the C&C version, and it's a huge one, is that Batman and Robin now act and speak in character. Obviously, that is crucial. Beyond that, if I were simply evaluating the written words on the page, without, of course, having the knowledge of how the actors would bring it to life, it is not all that much more impressive to me than the rejected script by Cannan and Cash.
Does High C happen to say why?
Well, to some extent, he does say some things about it. Because he goes into a lot of, some detail about what he doesn't like about the broadcast Marsha story. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so this script, this might be a short episode. Ha ha ha. Because you have to read quite a way in to find any significant difference from what was shot. I mean, there are, the usual tweaks of dialogue, a cut line here and there, or an added narration, but it's basically the same story for a number of pages. Mm-hmm. Although seeing the script helped me realize a few things I hadn't, such as on pages 18 and 19, Marsha has 3 lines that are all "how very something of you, Batman."
Right.
Rude the first time. The second time it's chivalrous, but changed to gallant for the broadcast version. And third, irrelevant.
Sit down, make yourselves comfortable.
We're not here to be comfortable, Marsha. This is strictly a business call.
How very rude of you, Batman.
Batman's never rude to a lady, but you're no lady.
She may not be a lady, Robin, but she is a woman, and as such, she deserves some courtesy.
How very gallant of you, Batman.
Let's dispense with the mutual flattery, Marsha. Fire Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara.
How very irrelevant of you, Batman. They're unimportant.
Yes, and they're so close to each other. In the case of How Very Chivalrous and How Very Irrelevant, they're like two, they're two contiguous lines. She just has a line from Batman in between them.
Yeah. Also, on page 20, as High C also noticed, the script doesn't have Batman and Marsha repeating each other's names, which, of course, is a reference to Stan Freberg's John and Marsha record.
Yes.
As any Dr. Demento listener would know.
John? Marsha? As I was reading this, I could, of course, hear Carolyn Jones's voice saying, "Darling." Mm-hmm. But then I had to remind myself that I'm supposed to be hearing Zsa Zsa Gabor saying, "Darling."
Yes.
But they were both quite the darlings, the darling speakers when it came to the parts they often played. I believe that Morticia Addams said "darling" quite a lot as well.
Yeah, that's my memory, too.
Almost perhaps as though she were doing a Zsa Zsa Gabor impersonation. I wonder about that now. Considering,
because that wasn't something Charles Addams did, because the characters hardly spoke in those cartoons. But
right. But just imagine the scenario. Howie Horowitz says, "Oh, Bill, we can't get Zsa Zsa. She's booked." And Bill says, "Well, why don't we get Zsa Zsa Jr.? How about Carolyn Jones?" Who knows? Maybe there was some kind of discourse about the two of them going around Hollywood casting circles at the time.
Now, part of the problem, I think, with both versions of Marsha is that there are things in them that go against what was meant to be, the Semplian ideal of the show. And fortunately, some of them get cut. So the Grand Mogul is supposedly shouting Turkish battle cries. I don't know if Sherman was thinking somebody would translate them into Turkish, but what's written in the script is, on page 22, "ham and cheese on rye and a coffee to go." And on page 52, "don't let crabgrass ruin your lawn."
Yeah, I wondered about that too. Was he expecting a Turkish to English translator to be on standby on the set so they could just translate it on the spot for the Grand Mogul?
I guess.
Seems unlikely.
Well, it's better than having the show suddenly have miniatures for special effects.
Right. It is a little more likely than that possibility.
But at that point, I wanted to say, is Stanley Ralph Ross ghostwriting this? Because those feel like Ross jokes.
Of course they do, yeah.
Holy borscht belt.
Exactly. It seems very, very like that.
Now, at the end of part 1, yes, we're already to the end of part 1, but I think in part 2 there's more to talk about. So, as broadcast, Dozier's narration is in kind of a damaged form. Where he says,
Batman to become a henpecked husband, and Mrs. Batman, Gotham City's arch criminals.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of cut, and so there were words missing. And we finally get to see, reading this, that it was supposed to say, and Mrs. Batman, one of Gotham City's arch criminals. And I'd never been able to intuit what was missing there. But now, I think we've talked about this before, but how would this narration have been recorded? There's another spot in that same part of the show where there's nothing missing, but it's clear that like two different recordings are kind of spliced together right before the word diamonds.
Mr. and Mrs. Batman, the dynamic duo may become a trio. The Queen of Diamonds aims high.
Yes, there's a little overlap or maybe even a bit of vocal difference, like a different timbre to the voice, like it was recorded in a different place, like, the room was different. I think probably Dozier either blew his reading or they just decided that it wasn't good enough, or they changed language. They did change some of the language, and he had to re-record it, and they just spliced in the bits that were better along with the bits that were okay to begin with. So it was just a tape editing job, not unlike any other, but still pretty noticeable if you're paying attention to it.
Well, and it seems like they must have goofed then when they lost the one of.
Yes, I'm guessing that's probably right.
Yeah, just editing error. So, yeah, part 2 varies a bit more from the broadcast version. First of all, when Alfred and Aunt Harriet crash the wedding ceremony, some of the proper nouns are changed. Alfred introduces himself as Sir John Macmillan, which is changed to Ethelbert Soames as broadcast. The name of the law firm changes, and the name of Miss Henrietta Tillotson's hometown changes. I wondered if those might have been Alan Napier suggestions.
That's interesting. I wonder, because Ethelbert is certainly a funnier name, and it sounds funnier when he delivers it, like he's almost like, joshing on his own Britishness.
Yeah, Sir John Macmillan, like... It's what a plain name. But yeah, Ethelbert Soames is much better. So that was kind of interesting to me that got changed after this version was typed up. The script has a bit more focus on the well-wishers when Batman and Alfred come out of the church and are showered with rice. One of the well-wishers says, "Awfully strange-looking bride." Which I had to wonder, which one is the bride, do you think?
It's a good point. Could the cowl be considered a veil?
Yeah, and the cape is a wedding dress.
A train. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's...
A train. Oh, that's green eggs and ham. Never mind.
I'm a train, I'm a chicka-train. That's Captain Kangaroo. So, yes, I hadn't thought about that. I'd immediately thought of Alfred as being mistaken for the bride at first for some reason, because, Batman is always the man in the relationship. The man. But I think it makes perfect sense, although, the bride wears blue, dark blue at that. A little strange. But remember
something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. The bat cowl is the blue part.
Yes, yes, that's right. Old, new, and borrowed. We'll have to, the jury's still out on all of those categories. But I'm reminded of that essay, the author of which I can never remember, which is, that's on me.
The article he's referring to is Andy Medhurst's Batman, Deviance, and Camp from the 1991 essay collection, The Many Lives of the Batman.
But the article that we've read when talking about Batman and Camp specifically, in which the author writes that, it's one of the campiest moments in the history of the series when, the worst possible fate, worse than death that could happen to Batman is that he gets married. It's like, oh no, heterosexual marriage. So it's lovely. I think it's, a wonderful turn of events, even if it's completely accidental, that people are throwing rice after what looks to be a gay couple that just got married in drag, with, the bride dressed as Batman. So I love the line, and I'm so sorry that it was cut, the line about, the strange-looking bride. If only it had been kept, the show would have, the Camp Richter scale would have gone, completely over the top. It's already at a pretty high level at this point.
Now, I've still got notes, but up to this point, was there anything else that you noticed?
Oh, no, I think as much as I hate to say it when we're sitting here recording this episode, I'm a little over Marsha'd right now. I'm feeling like I'm dwelling in the marsh for too long. I watched these episodes before we had our discussion of Women of Season 2. We read the other script, the initial script, and now we're reading this one. I feel, sort of super saturated with Marsha right now. So I feel as though anything I've said about this part, at least as written, I've already said before, but I'm eager to find out what's on your mind about part 2. So let's go forward with all speed. Turbines to speed. Roger, ready to move out.
Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange?
Are you addicted to classic TV shows? Did you spend the 80s sitting in front of the boob tube? Then join us for TV Tangents, where we examine television of the 20th century with barely any contemporary context. Visit Shout Engine, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, and look for TV Tangents.
Well, I'm wondering if you noticed this. Would standards and practices have been against showing people getting shots with hypodermic needles? Because the Grand Mogul is about to give Robin a shot with a needle on page 39, but on screen he's got the little bow and arrow from the Cupid figure. But then he and Marsha, of course, rush out because Batman's coming, and then Batman comes in and he's also got a hypodermic needle to give Robin the antidote, but on screen it's a pill. So we went from 2 hypodermic needles to 0, and that can't be coincidence.
No, I don't think so. I think rather than standards and practices being against it, because I suspect that on, one of the ubiquitous medical and doctor shows of the time, like, Marcus Welby, this was probably, pretty normal to see a hypodermic needle on screen. I think probably it's more about the childhood audience, the children audience, that they're trying not to freak out kids who are freaked out by needles. And if you think kids were only freaked out by needles in the 60s, boy, you haven't had kids lately, have you? Needles were still pretty freaky to my son Noah until he turned about 9 and finally, was okay with getting a flu shot. Even though he didn't like the idea, he still went ahead and got it. And then he said, hey, that wasn't so bad. But before that, it was like, scream and run. So my guess is it had to do with knowing your audience and wanting to make sure that no kids were hiding their faces behind pillows when a hypodermic shows up.
Yeah, that makes sense. A bit of efficiency built in as they shot it. So on pages 42, 43, Sherman writes that Aunt Hilda has a bathing cap, quote, to protect her hair. I don't know why else she would be wearing one. And then she gets out of the cauldron and switches to her conical hat. But what they did on set was simply they gave her a conical bathing cap. So no need to change hats. You got the bathing cap, you got the conical, it's the cone shape, it's all there. So
Right.
Now, I was interested in this too. So on 45, when Robin wakes up in the Batcave, as broadcast, there's a whole 2-minute conversation added between Batman and Robin that's not in the script. About how the Bat Diamond has caused all this trouble because of greed, and Marsha can't wear the diamond, but she wants it anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And how Batman used his willpower to defeat Marsha's drug, but Robin couldn't, and neither could Gordon and O'Hara. All of that is missing from this script. And then it finally goes into using the Bat computer to track down Marsha.
Why would Marsha want that particular diamond? She can't wear it.
You can't wear Michelangelo's. You can't wear vintage cars or old stamps or coins. But to certain collectors, they're a way of life. In fact, life itself.
Cars and stamps and coins I can understand. But where would you find a place to put that diamond of that size?
That's an academic question, Robin. She's not going to get it.
Gosh, I hope not. But when you got me out of that bird cage, you said it was a long story and you'd explain it later. Just what happened?
To you, the same thing that happened to me, a Cupid's dart.
I felt it, but she said it wasn't poisoned.
Probably not in the true sense of the word poison, but certainly it contained some secret ingredient by which your sense and your will were affected.
Now, I'm sure part of it was simply they didn't have enough content to get up to the target runtime, but it was interesting to me that they chose this particular point to add stuff and why they added all of this stuff.
Yeah, well, for one thing, it allows Batman to be kind of civic responsibility square as a Rubik's Cube Batman by, mentioning, it's kind of, going into a kind of brief soliloquy about greed, avarice, and the criminal mind. And, what it means to be a good citizen is to not do stuff like that, not to covet your neighbor's bat diamond, for example. So there's that. It's happy talk, but it's a pretty, Batman-specific kind of filler.
Yeah, and I felt like the way it was written in the script, it felt kind of rushed. And I think it kind of benefits from taking a little time to sort of digest what's happened up to that point. And kind of catch up with it. And, Batman and Robin are kind of thinking it through and getting up to speed with each other. And now, although Batman doesn't tell Robin that he almost married Marsha,
yes, that's true. And Robin was basically dead to the world the entirety of that during that event.
I guess Batman figures it's just as well if Dick doesn't know this. So
yes, I suppose so. Batman might drop in Robin's estimation if he were to find out about this.
Holy ball and chain, Batman.
Robin, stop making that noise.
There's also a bunch of dialogue added when Alfred visits the GCPD. Well, first of all, Gordon's recognition of Alfred's voice it's rewritten in a way that so that Alfred and we can have a moment of panic that maybe Gordon recognizes his voice from the bat phone. Page 49. Gordon. As Batman said, if it hadn't been for you, he'd be on his honeymoon right now. Wider angle. Include Alfred, sitting across the office. Alfred. I only did what any citizen of Gotham City might have done, sir. O'Hara. And lucky you did. Gordon. Your voice sounds familiar somehow. Alfred. It should, sir. You've heard it many times. Gordon. I have? Alfred. At Mr. Bruce Wayne's residence, sir. Gordon. Recognition. Of course. You're his butler, Alfred. Where is Bruce, by the way? Alfred. I believe he's on a hunting expedition, sir. Gordon. Well, I hope he comes back with some nice trophies. Alfred. I'd like to join you in that hope, sir.
As Batman said, if it hadn't been for you, he'd be on his honeymoon right now.
The Cape Crusader is too kind. After all, I only did what any citizen of Gotham City would have done.
And lucky you did, sir.
Yes, good thinking and very inventive, I might add. Producing a past wife of Batman's who never existed.
Oh, but she very definitely exists, sir.
Batman's ex-wife?
No. The lady who played the part, sir. Mrs. Harriet Cooper, Dick Grayson's aunt. In fact, it was her idea, giving credit where credit is due.
Now I know where I've heard your voice before. Aren't you Alfred, the Wayne butler?
Yes, sir, I am. Yes.
Well, Alfred, if I ever need a wife on the spur of the moment, I'll know. Begorra, I forgot. Bonnie said that me wife called when I was out, and I haven't called her back.
Mm-hmm. Which I kind of love.
Yeah, it's much
really
better
great.
a shot.
Yes. Couldn't agree more.
But then all that stuff about what Gordon and O'Hara are going to tell their wives about their absence is not in this either. That's added later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So maybe another place where they thought they needed to pad it out to get up to the amount of time they needed.
Yeah, I guess so.
High C said about this scene, the idiocy of the GCPD is a well-worn gag, but the addition of the wives makes it hit differently, as the kids say. So Idiot O'Leary decides to leave O'Hara in the clutches of a villain, talking about that first scene at the jewelry store, even though he has a worried wife at home. Yikes. Again, I know it's being played for laughs because it's season 2, but imagine if Marsha were a season 1 villain, and the show were still, I don't know, an action-adventure. So, yeah, if you think about it logically, it does kind of seem odd that O'Leary would just kind of, he's married and he's the police chief, but he's running around with Marsha and helping her steal a diamond. Oh well, shrug.
Yeah, it really it rings some bells that shouldn't be ringing right then.
Now, mysterious stage direction.
Mm-hmm.
When Aunt Hilda says she's going to change Batman and Robin into mice, at the top of page 51, Sherman writes, they exchange a slow look. They've walked into Ward 8.
Mm-hmm.
What is Ward 8? I Googled it, and what I found out was it's the name of a cocktail, and I don't think that's what Sherman is referring to.
No, I think it means the nut house.
Okay. That's maybe some kind of old slang that's so out of date that maybe that's what the drink was named after, and now nobody knows anything but the drink. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. But yeah, it strikes me, because Hilda is definitely round the bend. Mm-hmm. And the things she's saying, clearly she's had some success with her spells and so in her formulas, and so Marsha still believes in her, at least marginally, although she's losing her patience, obviously. But I think, considering they're talking about a medical ward and Batman and Robin are looking at each other nervously or with disbelief, it's got to have something to do with the nut house, so to speak.
Yeah, probably. I don't know what else it could mean. Mm-hmm. I just wonder where that particular term came from, Ward 8. Why 8, not 7, not 5?
Yes, good question. 3 is a number to which thou shalt count, and the number to which thou shalt count shall be 3. 1 shalt thou now count, shalt thou not count. Sorry, losing my holy hand grenade dialogue box here.
Now, I don't remember, I didn't have a chance to go back and listen to our original discussion of this arc, but when I watched this, these 2 episodes for our women in the first half of season 2 episode, and I got to the toad scene, I was like, what?
Oh, I felt the same way.
And then watching it with the script, then I guess I noticed some lines that I had been bleeping over. Ooh. And because before I was thinking, well, like, where did Batman and Robin come from? I mean, and why were their toads talking like them? And so, Grand Mogul was a ventriloquist, and Batman and Robin were locked up in a cell, and they broke out of it, and they came in the window.
But, Batman, how could those 2 toads talk just like you and Robin?
Oh, darling, it was a simple little prank.
Some prank.
The Queen of Diamonds was relying on the Grand Mogul's ability as a ventriloquist to deceive you both.
But, Batman, the Bat-Toad talked in your normal voice just a moment ago.
So it did.
You see, Batman knows a trick or 2 about ventriloquism himself.
And a few tricks about getting out of barred cells.
I was wondering how you managed that, darling.
Thanks to the extraordinary transmitting powers of the Bat Diamond, which you've been after, we were able to carry on some long-distance computations in the Batcave.
After we wired the bars of the cell to convert them to a radio aerial.
Okay, so it all makes sense to me now. I mean, it's dumb, but but it makes sense to me now.
Yeah, but, I remembered so little about that scene that, I wondered what the heck I was eating, or paying more attention to the first time I watched it. It's like, these Fritos are delicious. Apparently I was more interested in that than I was in the fact that Batman and Robin had apparently changed into frogs. My second thought was, my God, did they really turn into frogs? Because I remembered so little about it. A, I couldn't believe that I would not have remembered it if this had happened. But B, I couldn't account for the fact that I had no visual recollection of this event. So I'm like, what's going on here?
Even when I watched it for our episode with Nancy Northcott, I didn't remember ever seeing the toad scene before. Like, what? I don't remember this. You just watched it back in, 2016 or something, but what?
Not possible. Oh.
I was hoping that the script would reveal that there was a different version that made a lot more sense that got butchered when it was shot. But nope, it's pretty much the same thing.
Wackadoodle. Yeah. Huh.
And as broadcast in that scene, when they give the number of combinations on the lock in the cell, it's changed to a more precise number, which makes it funnier. As written, it was just 3,700,000, but Batman says,
you see, the tumbler lock on the cell door only had 3,724,521 possible combinations. Child's play for the Bat computer.
Sounds like one of those moments where Kirk will say to Mr. Spock, so you weren't able to be any more precise than that, Spock? It was an estimate, Spock might say.
Now, the PDF that I put up, I had added on a document that I had as a separate PDF, which is another tag scene.
Yes.
Which, as you can tell from the end of it, it was supposed to lead into the tag scene of Aunt Hilda teaching a cooking class. Mm-hmm. So, they would never do this, a tag scene that has 2 different scenes in it.
Right.
The first scene being Bruce giving the toads to Aunt Harriet for a lily pond that she maintains, and then she talks to Bruce about how she and Alfred bailed out Batman at the wedding.
Right.
And High C comments, Sherman clearly didn't grasp the pacing of the show. Obviously, his idea of a double tag was scrapped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think that not just this show, but any show, especially a half-hour comedy, why would any writer in the 1960s think that a double tag would make sense? There's barely time for a single tag.
Yeah, I can't remember seeing that on any show ever. Yeah, tag scenes usually don't kind of get so into being, I don't know what I want to say, but it's just like one place, one incident, and it's done.
Well, yeah, I mean, most tag scenes don't even, in Batman anyway, don't even tie off loose ends, or at least I would say a good proportion of them don't, because the loose ends have pretty much all been tied off by the final scene. Here, though, we get to find out what happens to Hilda, which is useful. But trying to tie off two different loose ends, or have a loose end plus, tied off plus a kind of kicker of a joke in the end. It's just not logical. This, doesn't fit the logic of the 60s sitcom anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have. Anything to add about the script?
I don't think so. If I could just say a word in defense, maybe not defense, but just in praise of Carolyn Jones, I think if this episode or this arc has anything going for it, that makes it rise above the quality of its final script, I think it's Carolyn Jones. I think she's great. She really kind of nails her Zsa Zsa Gabor impersonation, if that's what she's trying to do. And she's completely unflappable, very much like the character of, she plays in The Addams Family. I just think she's, hilariously funny, very underplayed, very, suave and sophisticated, and pretty sexy. Even though she's not wearing her Morticia dress, it's not quite as form-fitting as what she's wearing in this appearance.
I like a couple of spots where she tells her men to, take care of Batman and Robin. She delivers her line just so offhandedly. So,
yes.
Just dispatch them.
Indeed.
And there's no direction for that in the script. That's her and the director.
Right, but why, oh why, this is a rhetorical question for the ages, does she have this kind of reverse seraglio where, she's in charge of this, well, I suppose, she's the one who, she's the woman who has all these men, bowing and scraping before her and standing around in bird cages. So she does have kind of a seraglio, but also the whole harem business.
What is a seraglio?
It's like, it's where sultans kept their harems.
Okay.
In popular culture, anyway, where their multi-wives lay around on pillows, feeding each other grapes and waiting for the Sultan to show up. She's got that here, and I suppose that's the motivation for this kind of vaguely Middle Eastern theme to her hideout. But what that's got to do with diamonds, it's as confusing as what Shakespeare has to do with the puzzler, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. It is like one element too many.
Yeah, let's just throw a whole pile of motifs at this and see which one sticks. I did notice, though, that there is one reference early on when Robin has a line about Marsha dealing from the bottom of the deck. I think that survived into the final, as shot version of this script. But that's the one reference to the Queen of Diamonds as a playing card that survives into this version. So I was a little... maybe not surprised, but, it's a throwaway, and as far as that goes, it's a pretty decent throwaway. But I'm glad that Sherman didn't try to push it any further than that, because, that would have been probably the straw that broke the villain motif camel's back, to just, pile on the playing card references the way that the initial script did.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
Coming up, more from Adam and Burt, a new Holy Deja Vu segment, and we read your mail in the Bat Inbox. Help support To the Bat Polls and all the Deconstructing Comics shows with a monthly donation to the Deconstructing Comics Patreon page at patreon.com/deconcomics. For just $2 a month, you get outtakes from every To the Bat Polls episode. Plus, Paul and I make bi-weekly videos for all patrons, usually featuring a TV trivia quiz. Last week's video touched on the Bionic Woman and other classic 70s shows, and next week's is about Looney Tunes. Patrons can also vote in polls for which Bat topic you'd like us to cover next. Further perks at higher support levels, including the right to have an ad for your own project on the show once a month, and hours of podcasts on the early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man and on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So go to patreon.com/deconcomics and select the level of your monthly donation. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support.
Favorite villain? I would have to say Catwoman. And you guys know what I mean. I had 3 Catwomen. It's 27 lives, isn't it, that I had to go through? Whew. You give me curious stirrings in my utility belt, Catwoman. My first day on the set, it was an exterior on the back lot at Fox. This series might be somewhat different in that as I arrived and sat down in my chair, the Riddler's car exploded in front of me, and rubber shrapnel flew by my head, and there were screams and people running, and I sat there just kind of thinking, do I want to put that cowl on or not?
On the series and on the movie, I had a wonderful stuntman, but my stuntman, Victor Paul, a terrific guy, always seemed to be off having a coffee with Adam while I'm getting hurt with the Batman stuntman, Hubie Kearns. You know, they had a policy, you know, on Batman, and that was if there's ever anything really dangerous, always use Burt. And as a result of that, I was constantly in the emergency hospital. You know, I thought I was an unlucky guy. And during the first episode, I mean, 4 days in a row in the emergency hospital, I didn't think I was going to survive the first week.
Oh, Mr. Douglas, your mother sent me. I am Claude of the Ritz Plaza.
Oh, your mother's hairdresser.
Hair stylist, if you please.
Oh. Well, how did she get you to come way out here?
Well, Mr. Douglas, everyone has a skeleton in their closet, and somehow your mother found mine. All she had to do was to say one word to me, Scranton. And here I am.
What happened in Scranton?
Well, I don't think that's any of your business.
Holy Deja Vu. Lisa Douglas and the Every Other Wednesday Afternoon Ladies Club have agreed that they need a beauty parlor in Hooterville. So Lisa calls her mother-in-law...
Sorry.
Lisa calls her mother-in-law in New York for a referral, and mother-in-law sends stylist Claude, who she's blackmailed into it because she knows what happened in Scranton. However, this season 1 Green Acres episode, called What Happened in Scranton, never gives us the answer to that question. But another question arises. Doesn't Claude look familiar? In fact, add a fedora and a briefcase and you've got Alfred Sly, Harry's lawyer in the Batman episode The Dead Ringers.
Ah.
Both characters played by James Millhollin.
Talk about crude, naked police brutality. Are you going to charge my client or aren't you?
I hereby charge him with a felonious attempt to perforate the dynamic duo and to play a piano music roles.
Very amusing. Where are your witnesses?
Witnesses?
I lay a countercharge, sir. I accuse Batman and Robert of malicious mischief. To wit, the damage of a licensed perforating machine by introducing foreign objects into same. Said objects being themselves.
Saints alive. The world's gone mad. The whole planet lunatic.
Millhollin was born Arthur James Millhollin in Peoria, Illinois in 1915 and grew up in Council Bluffs, Iowa. He performed in school plays and after high school was with the Omaha Community Playhouse. Wikipedia says his first role on film was in the anthology series The Elgin Hour in 1955 on TV. Although IMDb lists 3 1954 credits for him, starting with an episode of Rod Brown with the Rocket Rangers. Sounds interesting.
And also completely unplaceable. I mean, that's not a series that has lasted in the popular culture memory outside of the internet, I'm sure.
Neither is the Elgin Hour, for that matter.
Nope.
Wikipedia says he often played, quote, nervous, excited, and befuddled men with pop eyes and peculiar mannerisms, usually occupying such positions as hotel clerks, government bureaucrats, military officers, or other middle management authority figures, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
He appeared in quite a number of TV shows and movies in the 1950s and 60s, including 4 episodes of Dobie Gillis, each time as a different character.
That happens so frequently to actors who play character roles on Batman and every other show from the 60s.
Yeah. And a lot of the other shows that he appeared in more than once, it was as different characters.
Mm-hmm.
He was a regular on the Imogen Coca sitcom Grindle, playing Anson Foster, 3 appearances on The Twilight Zone, and of course 4 appearances on 77 Sunset Strip. He appeared once on My Living Doll with Julie Newmar, and on shows you and I may have seen, including The Dick Van Dyke Show, Get Smart, That Girl twice, Bewitched, The Beverly Hillbillies, Lost in Space as Willoughby the Llama in The Great Vegetable Rebellion, which I haven't seen yet, The Brady Bunch, Love American Style 5 times, The Odd Couple 3 times, and finally his final screen appearance as Mr. Rudy in the 1979 Happy Days episode Potsy Quits School. Which I don't remember.
No, I don't either. I'll bet it had something to do with his music career.
Turner Classic Movies says that perhaps Millhollin's best remembered role, after Batman of course, was in the 1958 movie No Time for Sergeants, in which Andy Griffith plays Private Will Stockdale, a country bumpkin drafted into the Air Force and who is driving everyone crazy. And Millhollin plays one of his foils, military psychiatrist Royal B. Deming. The film retained a number of cast members from the Broadway play of No Time for Sergeants that ran from October 1955 to September 1957, including Millhollin himself, Andy Griffith, and Don Knotts. And doing this play was how Griffith and Knotts met. And of course, a few years later, Griffith brought on Knotts to play Deputy Barney Fife on his self-titled sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the play No Time for Sergeants was performed in the Alvin Theater, where I saw Annie performed in 1981.
Oh, no kidding.
Apropos of nothing. Millhollin retired after his Happy Days appearance and died May 23, 1993 in Biloxi, Mississippi at the age of 77. I guess we never will find out what happened in Scranton.
Well, what happens in Scranton stays in Scranton.
Yeah, I guess so.
And what happens in Scranton, as far as I know, is The Office. That's what she said.
Bat Inbox about our talk with Nancy Northcott about the women in the first half of Batman Season 2. On everything is from the message board. So, Paul, take the first one.
We were moving with Nancy. Mm-hmm. Okay. Clavier Ankh says, it's too bad you didn't get to talk about Chickadee. She was one of the most dangerous moles. She threatened to shoot Chief O'Hara in the bad fight at Gotham City Jail in Part 1, and then threatened to blow Aunt Harriet's brains out in Part 2. Oh, wow, you're right. That's a real omission on our part. I still can't think of Aunt May, excuse me, wrong comic book company, Aunt Harriet in peril without thinking of her, doing the right side up bicycle over the vat of boiling oil in the Zelda episode, right?
Well, maybe when we do the second half of Season 2, we can go back and include Chickadee in that.
Good idea.
Next from High C. I would say the attitude toward the moles in the first half of Season 2 is equally misogynistic as Season 1, but with the unfortunate added caveat that they are less important. In one sense, perhaps, that could be construed as a good thing. They are not being treated as, quote, poor deluded creatures, unquote, who have somehow been duped or lured into a life of crime by the promise of money and pretty jewels. They apparently made a conscious decision, all on their own, to be evil, so I suppose that's an improvement. Yet at the same time, they are imbued with less importance. As I noted, rarely do their arcs get a final act wrap-up in Part 2. No more chances to get all gussied up and hang out at a party at Wayne Manor before going back to the Slammer, or to Bruce Wayne's Reform School for Wayward Girls, or to join one's brother as a sheep herder overseas. In Season 1, you got that opportunity by reforming, or at least helping the duo at the end. Maid Marilyn does this, yes, but note how sexy dame Octavia, who even Robin admits is gorgeous, attempts to surrender to Batman. He rejects it and sends her back to Minstrel with a listening device planted in her purse. Think about that for a moment. Season 1, 1966 Batman would have wanted to extricate a poor deluded female from the clutches of a clearly unbalanced archcriminal. There is no telling what might happen to her, he might reason. But Season 2 Bats doesn't blink. If an evil henchmall can be used as a pawn to checkmate a villain, even if she is trying to give herself up to the law, in italics, she is fair game to be taken advantage of. That is not the code he went by just a few short months earlier. Did Batman ask the powers that be to give her special consideration because she tried to surrender earlier? We'll never know.
That is such a good point. That does seem, excessively cruel and more kind of tenacious, sinister Frank Miller Batman than Adam West Batman, who's more concerned about reform than anything else.
Mm-hmm. And
especially when it comes to poor deluded girls.
As Heisey noted in a part that I cut out to reduce the length here for time, we got plenty of time though compared to usual episodes, but he pointed out, a lot of this goes down to Charles Hoffman, who just didn't do anything to control the tone of the show as far as we can tell.
That's right.
And so, from arc to arc in Season 2, you've got various kinds of comedy and other problems like this one.
Mm-hmm. One supposes that Lorenzo Semple Jr. probably backed away from the show because he was getting so sick and tired of how little, control was, beyond his own interest in kind of, setting some very basic and strict parameters around the representation of Batman and of, Gotham City society and culture and all of that. That maybe he backed away faster because he was, the one lone voice crying in the wilderness about these rules that he wanted to put in place.
Maybe, although I feel like I've read that the main reason that he left Batman was that he wanted to get into movies.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
Everybody in television wanted to get into movies back then.
Yeah. Now everybody in movies wants to get into TV. But
exactly.
And Heisey's last paragraph, had this been a first season episode, we might have gotten more of a backstory on Octavia. Perhaps she was an aspiring but frustrated singer who turned to evil and joined Minstrel's criminal group. But she disappears after she discovers the bug. To be fair, the same thing happened to the Mall and husband and wife writing team Francis and Marion Cockrell's first season arc as well. She vanished 15 minutes before Part 2 ended. He's talking about Jill in the Joker arc, the Joker Trumps an Ace.
Right.
We've talked about that before. Jill kind of shows up late in Part 1 and then vanishes halfway through Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
And we never know what happened to her.
Right. Did
she escape? Did she go off to help her poor but honest brother? Did she get arrested and we just didn't see it?
Right. Yeah, maybe she just, somebody tripped her self-reform circuit and she went off and reformed herself. Okay, finally, I guess this is our last letter, right, or our last missive from Batwinged Hornet. Interesting show. I do believe there might be too many modern-day expectations employed to judge a show over 50 years old. That, and forgetting that most secondary characters on Batman, male or female, rarely had an arc at all. They were there primarily to trap the heroes, then fall to their fists in the second part. Even if one considers the poor deluded child/redemption-bound characters from Season 1, you'd be forced to acknowledge that they were not the focus of the story. Rather, it was another way of building up Batman's heroic/romantic aura by having Malls gaze heavenward and wish they could see Batman one more time. If anyone had an interest in seeing female characters with greater development or a sense of independence on 1960s TV, they were not going to watch Batman simply due to its focus never being about secondary characters. Heck, O'Hara was one of the main characters, with Stafford Rep listed in the title sequence. Yet across 3 seasons in a movie, I'm willing to bet fans could not list 10 solid facts about his background or details about his character. Being a cop is not one of them, other than that he's married and...
Irish.
Begorra. You would be better off with a series such as The Fugitive, where so many characters were written to bring the drama and depth for David Jansen's Richard Kimball to play against. You had the occasional love-struck woman sympathizing with Kimball, but you were never going to see an actress go the poor deluded child route or take the breathy Terry Moore lane of characterization. I will refrain from my first impulse here to do my Terry Moore impersonation. Sorry, Heisey. Look at it this way. In the 70s, if you were looking for more realistic, independent portrayals of women, would you watch Three's Company or The Bionic Woman? Neither. In the 90s...
Relatively,
yes.
I guess, Bionic Woman, but...
Of course. I'll never forget when Janet asks, what's her name? Chrissy, whether she chews on her left or the right side of her mouth, and then there's a big close-up of Chrissy as she chews in the middle. Her mouth just goes with her like front teeth doing all the chewing. It's like, now that's entertainment and feminism right there. In a big, package plopped in your lap. In the 90s, would you watch Baywatch or ER? The point being is that nuance where female characters were concerned simply did not fit into the formula of certain TV series, and Batman's was certainly using that formula. Yeah, I completely agree. It's still worth looking at and talking about representations of women and men, gender, masculinity, femininity, queer identities, etc. In shows that didn't have... In fact, in some ways, it's more telling, for me anyway, to look with that kind of scrutiny at a show that doesn't pretend to feminism or anything along those lines, because you get more of the kind of cultural unconscious of that, gender roles out of shows like that. Just like this is what patriarchy looks like at rest or at play. And you can learn some things about maybe some of the foibles and more ridiculous as well as more sinister aspects of gender limitations, limitations placed on people because of their gender, on their behavior, on their thinking, on their aspirations, from watching a show that's has no pretense of feminism or anything else. Anyway, it's point well taken, Batwing Hornet. Nevertheless, it's not like we're going looking for the show to be feminist or spanking it for not being feminist. It's more like, this is a slice of 1966, 67 culture, and what was considered entertainment of a fairly innocuous sort at this point in U.S. history, and so it tells us something about what the pulse of gender roles and thinking about gender was at the time. So that's worth something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like maybe not necessarily expecting it to be feminist, but sort of teasing it for not being feminist. I don't know.
Yeah, no, we certainly do some of that. And we are criticizing it for, not being as feminist as we'd like it to be. So, Batwing Hornet has a point. Mm-hmm. But there's no way that we're not, even viewers at the time were looking at this based on their own proclivities and their own biases. Mm-hmm. So it's not as though there was ever a moment where there was this kind of objective, flat out, reading of this as an object of its time or a product of its time. Mass culture exists to be read and misread in a million different ways by every single slightly different, slightly distinct viewer of a show like Batman.
Okay, so next time we're going a little bit more in the direction of Batman as a character, not so much Batman 66. There's a Hulu documentary called Batman and Bill about Bill Finger, the until recently insufficiently credited co-creator of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to talk about that next time. I should mention, I'll probably mention it next time too, but this was recommended to us by listener Rick Napoli.
Yay, Rick!
And I put it into one of our patron polls with some other possible topics, and this won. So we are going to talk about it next time.
Yes, I think it'll kind of recharge our batteries a little bit too after all the Marsha. Not that I haven't enjoyed this, but it's fun to get back into, comics history and think about the reflection of Batman as a comics character back onto the 66 show. So as usual, we'll be centering on, or we'll be, kind of brought back on track to our consideration of the 66 representation of Batman and his world as we're talking about this. But it's always great to have this, moments to reflect on the history of the comics character and have an opportunity to do that. So thanks again for suggesting it, Rick, and glad your suggestion won the poll.
Yeah, so we'll be back in 2 weeks here at the same Bat RSS feed. Check the show notes for the YouTube video of Al Wood's ukulele version of the theme, the Marsha script that we talked about, and the Bat message board thread about our look at women in the first half of Season 2. Now, here's this episode's Bat question. Name one villain on the show who you could have done without, and how they could have been improved. Different actor, better writing, different motif? Send answers and anything else you'd like to share, including donations via PayPal if you like, to batpolls@deconstructingcomics.com. We're on Twitter at DeconComics, and on the Deconstructing Comics channel on YouTube. You can hear outtakes from this and every episode of To the Bat Polls and vote for topics for future episodes by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics. You can also help us out by shopping via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, by sharing our episodes on your social media, and by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And spread the word. Let all your friends who are Batman 66 fans know about the show. Next time, giving Bill Finger his due as co-creator of Batman. We'll discuss the documentary Batman and Bill. Now let's all get to work creating our own $1 million comics characters. We'll see you in 2 weeks. To the Bat Polls is a production of DeconstructingComics.com.